Chapter 23, Morning After Tension. The sun didn't rise over Manhattan this morning. It bruised the sky. A dull, heavy purple gave way to a sickly gray, the kind of light that makes the glass towers of the city look like jagged teeth. I was sitting at the marble island in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. I hadn't moved from this spot since 3 in the morning. I was still wearing the oversized sweater Alexander had seen me in yesterday, the one he'd held me in while he let his walls crumble. I looked at the clock on the oven. 5:45 a.m. He had promised to be home by 6 last night. He had promised to leave the titan at the office and come back to the mess. But the elevator hadn't chimed until nearly 4, and when it did, the man who stepped out wasn't the one who had cried in my lap. He was a ghost in a crumpled suit, his eyes fixed on the floor, his presence radiating a cold, vibrating energy that warned me not to approach. He hadn't even come to the bedroom. He'd gone straight to his private study and locked the door. I heard the heavy, mechanical click of that door opening now. I didn't turn around. I listened to the sound of his footsteps, slow, measured, and weary. He stopped just at the entrance to the kitchen. The air in the room, already thick with the scent of rain and stale espresso, seemed to tighten. "You're still awake," he said. His voice was a wreckage of its usual baritone, raw from a night of shouting at lawyers and staring at lines of code. "It's hard to sleep when the person who promised to be home 10 hours ago is a ghost in their own house," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Alexander walked into the room. He had taken off his blazer and tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, his sleeves rolled up to reveal his forearms stained with ink and fatigue. He looked like a man who had just returned from a war he wasn't sure he'd won. "Something came up," he said, walking to the espresso machine. "Something always comes up, Alexander. That's the nature of being you, but yesterday we had a breakthrough. You told me you were scared. You told me you'd let me into the mess." I finally turned to look at him. "And then, the first time a real mess happened, you locked the door and shut me out." Alexander hit the button on the machine, the hiss of the steam filling the silence. He didn't look at me. Julian Vane happened, Maya. He tried to burn the sterling IP to the ground. He tried to make the Horizon project worthless before the markets opened. I felt a jolt of alarm, but it was quickly eclipsed by anger. "And you didn't think to tell me? The woman who wrote the IP. The person whose father is lying in the next room because of that project. I was protecting you." He turned on me then, his eyes flaring with a dark, exhausted heat. "I wanted you to have one night of peace. One night where you could just be a daughter and a woman, without the weight of Vane's desperation on your shoulders." "I don't want peace if it's a lie, Alexander. I'm a partner. If the ship is sinking, I want to be on the deck with the bucket, not locked in the stateroom for my own safety." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. The morning after tension wasn't just about a late night, it was about the fundamental struggle of our relationship. He was a man who saw protection as a mandate, and I was a woman who saw it as a cage. "You said you surrendered," I whispered, stepping toward him. "But you only surrendered the parts of yourself that were easy to give. You didn't surrender the control. You're still trying to be the man who owns the room, even when the room is on fire." Alexander POV. Every word she said was a lash across my skin. I was exhausted, my brain felt like it was made of lead, and I was currently holding back a tidal wave of corporate ruin that she couldn't even imagine. And yet, she was right. I had gone back to the vault. The moment I saw Vane's message, the moment I realized the heart of my empire was under attack, The CEO had taken the wheel, and the man had been shoved back into the dark. "The IP is safe," I said, my voice tight. "We stopped the leak. Vane is finished." "I don't care about Vane right now," Maya shouted, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "I care about us. I care about the fact that I spent all night wondering if the man I saw yesterday was a dream. I wondered if I'd pushed you too far, and you decided that being human was too much work." I looked at her, and the anger in my gut suddenly dissolved into a devastating, hollow shame. She looked small in that oversized sweater, her hair a mess, her eyes red from lack of sleep. She had been waiting for me. She had been holding onto the hope of our connection while I was playing God in a lab 40 floors down. I walked toward her, the distance between us feeling like a mile. I reached out, my hands hovering near her shoulders before I finally let them drop. I didn't feel worthy of touching her. "I don't know how to do this, Maya," I rasped. "I don't know how to be the man who handles the crisis and the man who stays for dinner. For 10 years, the only way I survived was by becoming a machine. The machine saved the IP last night, but the machine, it doesn't know how to talk to you." "Then turn it off," she whispered. "I can't, not when the world is still trying to take everything from me." I reached into my pocket and felt the small, velvet box. The ring, it felt like a mountain in my palm. "Vane told me I was a fool for loving you. He said you'd realize I was just a man owning a pile of ashes." Maya stepped into my space, her chest brushing mine. She reached up and took my face in her hands. Her fingers were warm, a stark contrast to the coldness that had settled in my bones. "I don't care about the ashes, Alexander. I told you that. I love the man who is brave enough to stay in the room when the lights go out, but you're the one who keeps turning them off." I looked into her hazel eyes, and for a second the tension broke. It wasn't a surrender of the mind, but of the body. I leaned down, burying my face in the crook of her neck, my arms wrapping around her waist with a strength that was almost painful. I inhaled the scent of her, jasmine and the faint, sweet smell of the tea she'd been drinking. "I'm sorry," I murmured against her skin. "I'm so goddamn sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "Be here, really here." We stayed like that for a long time. The only sound the rhythmic thrum of the espresso machine and the distant hum of the waking city. The tension was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer the sharp, aggressive friction of an argument. It was the heavy, atmospheric pressure of two people trying to find a new way to exist together. Maya POV. The physical reconnection was a relief, but the emotional gap was still yawning wide. Alexander's body was a solid, grounding weight against mine, but I could feel the electricity still humming under his skin. He was still in war mode. His muscles were tight, his heart beating a frantic, tactical rhythm. He hadn't let me in, he'd just let me hold the wall. "Come to bed," I whispered. "Just for an hour. No phones, no Marcus." "I can't, Maya. The markets open in 3 hours. I have to be at the tower to oversee the bankruptcy filing for Vane's subsidiaries. If I'm not there, the sharks will move in on the scraps." "The sharks can wait an hour." "Not these sharks." He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. There was a look of agony in them, the look of a man who was being pulled in 2 directions by a team of wild horses. "I have to protect what's ours. If I lose this, I lose the medical suite. I lose the security. I lose the house in the Hamptons." "You won't lose me," I said, gripping his forearms. "Do you still not understand that? You don't have to be a billionaire to have me." Alexander let out a short, dry laugh. "Maybe not, but I'd rather be a billionaire with you than a man with nothing, trying to figure out how to keep you in the style you deserve. The style I deserve. I felt the anger flare up again. Alexander, I spent my childhood in a lab and my 20s in debt. I don't need style. I need you. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was so tender it made my eyes sting. I know you do, and that's why I have to go. He kissed me, a hard, brief, desperate kiss that felt like a goodbye. Then he turned and walked toward the master suite to change. I stood in the kitchen, watching him go. The morning after tension had reached its peak. I realized then that the first surrender hadn't been a final victory. It had been the start of a much longer, much more dangerous campaign. I wasn't just fighting Vane or the board anymore. I was fighting 10 years of Alexander Blackwood's self-preservation. Alexander POV. I stood under the shower, the water as hot as I could stand it. I looked at my hands. They were steady now, but my soul felt like it was vibrating. I had lied to her, not about the facts, but about the depth of the danger. Vane wasn't just bankrupt, he was vengeful. And a vengeful man with nothing left to lose was a man who might do something more than just leak code. I had to be at the tower. I had to be the Titan. I dressed in a black suit, the sharpest, most unforgiving one I owned. I knotted my tie with clinical precision. I looked in the mirror and saw the man the world feared. The man who owned the room. But as I reached for my watch, I saw the small velvet box sitting on the dresser. I picked it up. I opened it. The diamond caught the morning light, a brilliant, defiant spark of clarity. I wanted to walk into the kitchen right now and put it on her finger. I wanted to tell her that no matter what happened today, she was the only thing that mattered. But I couldn't. Not while the ashes Vane had promised were still smoldering. I wouldn't ask her to marry a man whose empire was being held together by duct tape and sheer will. I put the box in the top drawer and locked it. I walked back into the living room. Maya was standing by the window, looking out at the city. She didn't turn around when I entered. "I'll have Russo stay with you today," I said, my voice returning to the CEO's tone. "And Marcus will be here at noon with the updated clinical reports for your father." "Fine," she said, her voice flat. "Maya." She turned. Her face was a mask of cold, professional distance, a perfect imitation of my own. It was the most heartbreaking thing I'd ever seen. "Be safe, Alexander," she said. "Don't get lost in the fire." I wanted to say something, anything, to break the ice that had formed between us. But the elevator chimed. Marcus was waiting. The world was calling. I turned and walked away. Maya POV. The elevator doors closed and the penthouse became a tomb. I walked to the guest wing and checked on my father. He was sleeping, the machines humming their steady, reassuring tune. The medical staff were busy in the small kitchenette, preparing his morning medications. Everything was perfect. Everything was managed. But I felt like I was suffocating. I walked to the private lab Alexander had built for me in the penthouse. I sat at the console and pulled up the security logs for the tower. If Alexander wasn't going to let me into the mess, I was going to find my own way in. I spent the next 3 hours digging. I bypassed the standard encryption Alexander's team had set up. It was good, but I knew the backdoors he'd left for me. I looked at the bankruptcy filings. I looked at the Vane global liquidation. And then I found it. A series of transfers from the private equity firm in the Caymans. They weren't just buying Vane's assets. They were buying the debt on Blackwood Tower. My heart stopped. Julian Vane hadn't just tried to burn the IP. He had made a move on the building itself. He was trying to take the room Alexander owned. I looked at the clock. 10:30 a.m. The board meeting would be starting in 30 minutes. Alexander would be walking into a trap, and he didn't even know it. He was so focused on the fire of the IP that he hadn't seen the flood coming for the foundation. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. "Miss Sterling," Russo said, stepping into my path as I reached the foyer. "Mr. Blackwood's instructions were for you to remain in the penthouse." "Mr. Blackwood doesn't know everything, Russo. Now, step aside, or I'll have Marcus fire you before I even reach the lobby." Russo hesitated. He saw the look in my eyes, the same fire he'd seen in the warehouse. He knew I wasn't asking. "I'll drive you," he said, reaching for his keys. "But if he kills me, I'm putting it in my will that you have to pay for the funeral." "A deal." Alexander POV. The boardroom was unusually quiet. Henderson and the other members were already seated, their faces uncharacteristically somber. I took my seat at the head of the table, feeling the weight of the morning's secrets pressing down on me. "Let's make this quick," I said, opening my laptop. "We have the Vane liquidation to finalize. I've already secured the subcontractors for the Horizon launch. We're back on schedule." "There's a slight problem, Alexander," Henderson said. He didn't look triumphant, he looked terrified. He pushed a folder across the table toward me. I opened it. My eyes scanned the documents. The debt on the Blackwood Tower. The mortgage, which had been held by a consortium in London, had been sold at 3:00 a.m. this morning. To the Cayman firm. Vane's firm. "They've called the loan," Henderson whispered. "They're demanding full payment by the close of business tomorrow. If we don't pay, they take the building. They take the lab, they take everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a masterstroke. Vane had known I would focus on the IP. He had known I would spend my night in the lab. He had used my own obsession with protecting the science as a distraction while he went for the jugular. "How much?" I asked, my voice a hollow rasp. "4 billion, the CFO said. "We don't have that kind of liquidity, Alexander, not with the Horizon rollout costs. We're overextended." I looked out the window at the city. My city. I was the man who owned the room, and in 24 hours the room would be gone. "There has to be a way," I said, my mind racing through 20 different strategies, each one more desperate than the last. "We call Knight. We leverage the Singapore assets." "Knight won't move that fast," Henderson said. "He's a gentleman. He doesn't do emergency liquidity on 24 hours' notice." The door to the boardroom burst open. I turned, expecting Marcus with more bad news. But it was Maya. She was breathless, her hair windblown, her white coat stained with rain. She looked like a storm that had just broken through the glass walls. She walked straight to the table and slammed a tablet down in front of me. "You're looking at the wrong firm, Alexander," she said, her voice ringing through the room. "Maya, you shouldn't be here." "Shut up and look at the data," she snapped. "The Cayman firm isn't the primary holder. They're a pass-through. Look at the secondary ledger. The money is coming from an account in Zurich." I looked at the screen. My fingers flew across the keyboard, tracing the digital trail she had uncovered. Zurich, Aunt Evelyn. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just Vane. It was the old guard of the Sterling family teaming up with the new guard of corporate greed. Evelyn had used the money Henderson had paid her to fund the debt acquisition. She was trying to take back the legacy by taking the building that housed it. "They're not trying to bankrupt you, Alexander," Maya said, her eyes locked on mine. "They're trying to force a merger. They want a seat on the board. They want control of the Horizon project." I looked at the board members. I saw the shift in their faces. They were already weighing the options. A merger meant stability. A merger meant the building was safe. But a merger meant Maya would be out. and the science would be in Evelyn's hands. "I won't do it," I said, the words sharp and final. "Alexander, we don't have a choice," Henderson said. "It's the building or the merger." "I have a choice," I said, standing up. I looked at Maya, and in that moment, the morning after tension vanished. It was replaced by a pure, white-hot clarity. She had found the truth. She had walked through the fire to bring it to me. She was the partner I had been trying to protect, and she had just saved the empire while I was busy knots in my tie. "Marcus!" I shouted. Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Sir." "Get Lord Knight on the satellite link. Now, and tell him I'm not asking for an investment, I'm asking for a blood oath." I turned to Maya. I walked around the table and took her hands in mine. The board was watching, the world was watching, but I didn't care. "You saved me," I whispered. "We saved us," she corrected. "Now, win the room, Alexander. I'll handle the lab." Maya POV. The next 6 hours were a blur of high-stakes gambling. I stayed in the boardroom, sitting next to Alexander as he negotiated with London. It was the most brutal, brilliant thing I had ever witnessed. He didn't just ask for money. He offered Knight a stake in the global distribution that was worth 10 times the debt. He used Vane's bankruptcy against him, showing Knight that with the competition gone, the Blackwood-Sterling alliance was the only player left on the board. By 4:00 p.m., the wire transfer was initiated. $4 billion moved across the Atlantic in a series of digital pulses. The Cayman firm was paid in full. The debt was settled. The building was safe. And Aunt Evelyn. Her Zurich accounts were flagged for investigation by the Swiss authorities by 4:15. The boardroom cleared out. The lawyers, the board members, the assistants, they all scurried away, leaving the two of us alone in the silence of the 90th floor. Alexander sat back in his chair, his eyes closed. He looked shattered. "We won," I whispered. "We won," he agreed. He opened his eyes and looked at me. The tension was gone, replaced by a deep, soulful relief. "You were right, Maya, about everything. If you hadn't come here, if you had stayed in the safety I'd built for you, I would have lost the room. And now..." He stood up and walked toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing inches away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. "Now," he said, his voice a low, steady vibration. "I'm going to stop trying to own the room, and I'm going to start trying to deserve the woman who's in it." He didn't kneel. That wasn't Alexander Blackwood's style. He just opened the box and held it out to me. The diamond was a brilliant, defiant spark in the afternoon light. "The locked-in clause is dead, Maya, but I'm asking you to stay anyway, not for 6 months, for as long as we both can breathe." I looked at the ring, then at him. The man who had surrendered, the man who had fought for me, the man who was finally, truly in the mess with me. "I have a condition," I said, my voice trembling. "Anything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from the fire. If we burn together." Alexander smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Deal." He took the ring from the box and slid it onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. "I love you, Maya Sterling." "I love you too, Alexander Blackwood." Alexander POV. I held her as the sun began to set over Manhattan. The morning after tension was gone. The fire was a hearth. The empire was safe, but for the first time in my life, I realized that the empire didn't matter. I looked at the ring on her finger. It was a promise. A boundary of a different kind, one built on choice, not on contracts. We had survived Act II. We had survived the fallout. But as I looked toward the elevator, I saw Marcus approaching with a new folder. The world wasn't going to stop. There would be new challenges, new rivals, new storms. But as I pulled Maya closer, I realized that I wasn't afraid of the storm anymore, because I wasn't the man standing alone on the cliff. I was a man with a partner. And in the world of Alexander Blackwood, that was the most powerful thing of all. "Let's go home," I said. "Actual home." She asked, "Actual home?" We walked to the elevator, hand in hand. The doors closed, and for the first time, the locked-in feeling was exactly what I wanted it to be. We were together, and the world could do whatever it wanted. Next chapter, Chapter 24, Secrets Leak.